Russian leader Vladimir Putin made the biggest mistake of his political career by starting a war in Ukraine. Putin's country has now completely turned into a fireplace due to the war in Ukraine. Unbelievable attacks, explosions, and interesting situations of unknown origin are experienced in Russian cities close to the Ukrainian borderline and in all the regions located in the depths or central parts of Russia. In recent days, much more activity has been observed in Russian cities close to the borderlines between Ukraine and Russia. These cities include Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk. Surprise explosions that took place in the same city in the past days brought Bryansk to the forefront of these three Russian cities. Let's witness the mysterious and striking explosions that took place in the city of Bryansk. Loud explosions were heard at a military airport in the Bryansk region. According to authorities, the airport was attacked by unidentified drones in the An-124 transport aircraft, which was decommissioned as a result of the explosion, and other elements were severely damaged. However, there is no official information about the full-scale state of emergency in the city yet. The inhabitants of the city were now fed up with such negative situations, and most of the citizens here had left the city. Worrying situations continued to occur in Bryansk, where the tension was at its peak due to the effects of the striking explosions. In addition to the explosions at the city's airport, a freight train derailed in another massive explosion in the Bryansk region. This striking act of sabotage resulted in a terrible fire. Russian Railways press service reported that a locomotive and 7 wagons of a freight train were derailed in the explosion. The train consisted of 60 wagons. In total, 2 tanks were filled with kerosene to avoid possible risks. Russian authorities suspended train traffic in the Ukrenerussiawar section. The Russian railway company described the cause of the explosion as the interference of unauthorized persons in the railway transport business. Extraordinary security measures were taken in the region after the dramatic situation in Bryansk. Rail assault groups continued to issue instructions on sabotage on the railway in the Russian Federation. The Russian authorities had taken extraordinary security measures to prevent another possible sabotage action, but Bryansk was still in a dangerous position as the anti-war sabotage groups and partisans in Ukraine were in large numbers. Only one day after the last explosion in the city, what was accepted came true, and another critical situation occurred near Bryansk in Russia. 20 cars of a freight train derailed due to the collapse of the railway line. This explosion was the second state of emergency to occur on Russian railways in the region in just 2 days. The train, which was going downhill when the rail was blown up, was carrying dangerous chemicals. It was claimed that the chemicals carried by the train were propane, sulfur, saltpeter, and lime. Although there was no fire, the Russian Emergencies Ministry was trying to cool the derailed wagons and spills. According to local media reports, the city of Bryansk had almost drawn a black curse on itself. The explosions were incessant. Russian leader Vladimir Putin and many Russian local officials could not understand these explosions. This explosion news was remarkably commented by some Russian male bloggers. According to the allegations made, the Ukrainian forces had secretly smuggled agents into Russia and concentrated on sabotage action from the first days of May. These allegations could not be officially confirmed, but the city of Bryansk was described as a critical zone after all these explosions. But all these measures could not prevent the explosions in the city. Russian leader Vladimir Putin could not remove the curse placed on Bryansk, and even no Russian local official could prevent such mysterious and gigantic explosions in the city. Did the Ukrainian armed forces begin their big counterattack plans with cross-border operations using partisan sabotage groups? These explosions that took place in the Russian city of Bryansk were not limited to the city. This time, the address of tension was St. Petersburg, the city where Putin was born. Explosions occurred in a military airspace area in St. Petersburg. These striking explosions, which occurred near the airport in the southern suburbs of the city, were also felt in the settlement of Kirovskaya Slavyanka in the Gachina district. Possible causes for the explosion are thought to be negativities at the nearby Pushkin military airfield, which is used by the National Guard and other Russian military structures. Moscow media announced that the Russian police, the National Guard, and the Ministry of Emergencies controlled the airspace, but no significant evidence was found. At the explosion site, the head of the Pushkinsky district refused to comment on the incident and advised media representatives to contact the press service. This incredible series of explosions in Russia infuriated Russian leader Vladimir Putin, according to some important intelligence reports. Putin will put the Russian Air Force on the stage in response to these stunning explosions in Russia. Since Putin's retaliatory plans are notorious, the possibility that the Russian Air Force will become much more active on Putin's orders should be considered. The Russian Air Force may have performed poorly at the start of the war in Ukraine, but intelligence leaks last month showed the United States was nervous about the prospect of Vladimir Putin returning to the sky to change what's going on the ground. The Pentagon document revealed that missiles for the Soviet-era S-300 and Buk air defense medium to long-range systems, which Ukraine relied on early to target aircraft, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles, could be completely exhausted by this month. Ukrainian air defense has been weakened by Moscow's constant attacks on infrastructure, with cruise missiles launched from Russian soil and Iranian-made kamikaze drones. In contrast, Putin may have shelved the assets of his country's air force, but the Russian Air Force is still seen as the second-largest military power in the world, and the Russian Air Force includes about 900 fighter jets and 120 bombers. These figures represent a significant risk that must be kept ahead of the widely anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive. If the Mikoyan MiG-35, Sukhoi Su-35, and Sukhoi Su-57I and the Russian army include large Ukrainian tanks and armored personnel vehicles that do not have sufficient air coverage, a possible future counter-offensive by Kiev may be hampered. Pentagon officials have suggested that urgent measures are needed, especially if Russian planes become more free to attack ground troop positions and important artillery targets. Mark Kansian, senior advisor to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, noted that Ukraine can defend its military forces with the remaining air defense, but not its cities or infrastructure. Kansian stressed that Russia has so far avoided risk in the air and therefore does not expect the Russian Air Force to hover over the Ukrainian skies anytime soon. In the long run, if the Ukrainians do not have more air defense assets, then they can gradually use the air superiority of the Russians. However, it will take a long time before the fighter jets and UAVs of the Russian Air Force can fly comfortably over Ukraine, and the Russians don't have that many cruise missiles. Therefore, the realization of the menacing aims of the Russians seems a little difficult. On the other hand, the Ukrainian army continues to make serious breakthroughs in air defense systems. The Biden administration announced in April that it would send additional air defense interceptors and munitions to Ukraine as part of a $2.6 billion aid package, some of which will aid Kiev's counterattack preparations. As part of this U.S.-provided package, Ukraine will receive 4 Patriot batteries. The $4 million price tag each missile carries makes them suitable for defense against the cheap drones that are wreaking havoc on Ukrainian cities. In short, all these efforts of Russian leader Vladimir Putin seem to be ineffective, thanks to air defense systems and other military aid packages sent to the Ukrainian army. Vladimir Putin, who was on the verge of losing the Ukraine war, faced the danger of civil war. Putin brought the world and his own fortune to the brink of an abyss with his war decision, while the devastating reality of the war united almost the whole world against Russia. The common name and everyone's target was Putin. A new report that shook Russia claimed that Putin's throne is shaking. The invasion of Ukraine created much turmoil in Russia. Putin's decision to invade Ukraine drew the reactions of not only the world, but also his own people, whom he tracked to an unknown end. The allegations that there was a leadership war in Russia fell like a bomb on the agenda. After predicting that Russia would be defeated in Ukraine under any circumstance, the race to overthrow President Vladimir Putin began. Russia's military crisis has led to a power crisis. The political war in Russia has already begun. Putin, whose war strategy in Ukraine has been widely criticized, is about to lose his seat. There has been talk backstage that Putin is likely to be sacked if the war in Ukraine continues to go awry. According to information obtained from sources close to his administration, it is said that a future without Putin is being discussed more and more. Although Russia's attack against Ukraine's territorial integrity began as of February 24th, it is still a matter of curiosity when this war would end. Invading Russia, which has attacked civilians as well as the Ukrainian army, has not been able to get one step ahead of its target, Moscow, which planned to bring down the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, within 48 hours. On the contrary, had a complete failure by withdrawing from the occupied territories. Internal coups are being planned in Russia, which has moved away from its position. On February 24th, Russian President Vladimir Putin has admitted the failure of the Russian army. We can also say that Putin understood that the Russian army should learn from the defeat of the Ukrainians. The fact that the Russian army, which was seriously hit in the Ukraine war, had difficulties and the operations it could carry out on the ground were quite limited, brought the war to a standstill for Russia. On the other hand, the Russian army, using military equipment from the Soviet Union, cannot prevent the attacks of the brave Ukrainian army and continues to retreat. Russian President Putin is officially disappointed in Ukraine, voicing his war failures on Ukrainian soil. The Russian president publicly humiliated the deputy prime minister for not buying more planes. Putin expressed disappointment with the events in Ukraine while scolding his Kremlin colleague. He accused Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manturov of failing to procure military and civilian aircraft to assist Russia's war effort. Angered at the failure to complete contracts for new civil and military aircraft, Putin could hardly contain himself. While Russia continues to be inadequate on the military front, Putin is also looking for new ways to make progress in Ukraine. Needing to make military changes after a difficult few months, Putin dismissed Sergei Surovikin, nicknamed General Armageddon, from his position at the head of Russia's war in Ukraine, just 3 months after he took office, and appointed Valery Gerasimov to replace him. Commanding General Sergei Surovikin, along with 2 other generals, was demoted to Gerasimov's deputy, officially ordered by Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. The reshuffle came with the express approval of Russian President Vladimir Putin and signaled that he still had confidence in his top military leaders, who have come under widespread criticism over the soldiers' performance in the conflict. Gerasimov is one of Putin's most trusted allies and one of 3 people who helped plan the invasion of Ukraine. On the other hand, after the failures in Ukraine, voices against the government have started to be louder in Russia. President Putin is trying to protect his seat. While contemplating the invasion of Ukraine, internationalists have become more hostile to the Kremlin's policies in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is on the verge of a palace coup. It's only a matter of time before Putin is overthrown in a coup led by disgruntled hardliners. Putin's place in the presidency began to become even more insecure. Among the rumors, it is claimed that 2 separate groups affiliated to Wagner leader Prigozhin and Defense Minister Shoigu are fighting for the leadership of Russia. There is a rivalry for the new leadership of the country between Wagner's founder, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is also a close friend of Putin, and Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Prigozhin's grouping stands against the grouping that Shoigu is included in. They have already started fighting with each other like it's a feudal war. At the same time, the claims were strengthened that Prigozhin began to position himself not only as a war commander, but also as a public and political figure. Ultranationalists and extreme hardliners who do not oppose the war but do not agree with the way the war is going want to put the bill on Putin and get him out of his seat. It has been understood that all this special military operation or war, which is now called by another name, has no benefit to Russia's reputation or to the economy. For this reason, other groups that could put pressure on Putin joined in the coup plan. The military is absolutely fed up with Putin's personal intervention. It's only a matter of time before we see a palace coup or a Kremlin coup under the leadership of Gerasimov. If they can come up with a plan and moral courage, the Russian army is in a desperate situation as the corruption in their supply system has given them weapons of clearly inferior quality to Western ones. Russian soldiers accused Russian President Vladimir Putin and the military's top command for leaving them high and dry in a frozen trench with supplies or medical care. Russian soldiers also expressed their belief that the actions of the command undermine the combat capability of the army. On the other hand, the town of Soledar, where the hottest clashes are taking place, is an important battlefield, and Russia is fighting for its first significant land gain in months. It looks like a tough victory for the Kremlin. Russia's war to capture Soledar will also come at the expense of the Russians suffering heavy losses and the comprehensive destruction of their claimed territory. The governor of Donetsk, Pavlo Kirilenko, stated that more than 100 Russian soldiers were killed in the Battle of Soledar in the last 24 hours. Kirilenko said that Russian forces bombed a dozen towns and villages in the region the other day, while the Russians literally walked over the bodies of their own soldiers and burned everything in their path. Russian forces are using mortars and rockets to bombard Soledar in a relentless assault after military setbacks have turned what the Kremlin had hoped to be a swift victory into a crushing war of attrition that had to end for nearly 12 months while the Russians continue their attacks. Civilians are trying to survive in the middle of this massacre. The fall of Soledar is seen as a reward for a Kremlin that has longed for good news from the battlefield in recent months. After losing the important city of Kherson in December, it also plans to provide a springboard for Russian troops to conquer other parts of the eastern Donetsk province that remain under Ukrainian control, particularly the nearby strategic city of Bakhmut. These Russian dreams are interpreted as the last hopes of a country that is about to lose the war. On the other hand, Ukrainian allies emphasize that they will continue to support Ukraine until victory is achieved against Russia and peace is restored in Europe. French President Emmanuel Macron announced that France will supply Ukraine with light tanks and will continue to support its air defense. It is also stated that the USA will start sending light armored combat vehicles to Ukraine. The willingness of the US to send Bradley-type armored vehicles was confirmed by President Joe Biden. Germany also announced that it will supply Ukraine with air defense systems and armored combat vehicles. It has been confirmed that Germany will supply Ukraine with the Patriot air defense system and Marder-type armored combat vehicles. Now, many weapons that the Ukrainian armed forces bought from their Western allies are on their way. Many of these weapons are heavy weapons, and the Ukrainian armed forces have a great opportunity to defeat Putin. He sees this in the bureaucrats in the Kremlin. It seems that the end of Putin will come from his own circle. The Russia-Ukraine war has entered a period of intensified ground and air attacks with the start of the new year. Fierce clashes took place in the eastern and southern regions. The Ukrainian army continues to repel the majority of Russian troops from the occupied territories. The extreme intensification of the war has brought new developments. The activity in the Black Sea attracts attention these days. According to the current information we have received from the field, the Russian Navy has started to withdraw from the Black Sea. Why did Russia make such a move? Could the missiles deployed by Ukrainian coastal and harbor areas have an impact on the Russian Navy's decision to withdraw? Does Russian leader Vladimir Putin have in mind to open the door to the invasion of Ukraine from Moldova? Let us evaluate the developments in the Black Sea together with the answers to all these questions. The Russian Navy aimed to encircle the Ukrainian coasts and ports. The Ukrainian army, on the other hand, did not give the Russian Navy this opportunity with the missiles placed in the coastal areas. As Russia failed to succeed in land and air operations in the invasion of Ukraine, it also failed to realize what it wanted at sea. The Russian Navy, which thought to surround Ukraine by sea, was stunned by the anti-ship missiles it encountered because the Ukrainian Navy had very powerful anti-ship missile systems. The Ukrainian-made Neptune anti-ship missile, the US-made Harpoon anti-ship missile, and the Harpoon cruise missiles with radar systems that can be launched from ships and submarines repelled the Russian Navy with successful attacks. Russia suffered great losses against these fully equipped systems. The Ukrainian Navy had buried the Moscow cruiser, the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, in the sea with the domestically produced Neptune anti-ship missiles. American-made Harpoon anti-ship missiles also inflicted heavy losses on the Russian Navy. The Russian Navy's tugboat, Spasitel Vasily Bek, was sunk by Harpoon anti-ship missiles. This operation was recorded by the Bayraktar TB2 unmanned aerial vehicle. In addition to all this, the fire in the Russian aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov had a negative impact on the Russian army. The Ukrainian army also repeatedly attacked the port of Sevastopol, destroying Russian warships and equipment there. Due to the repeated attacks on Sevastopol, Russia had moved many of its ships and equipment in this region to the port of Novorossiysk in Krasnodar region. There has been some activity in this region in recent days. 2 large land attack ships and about 10 warships in the port of Novosibirsk have left the region. These ships include the Pyotr Morgunov landing ship, the largest amphibious assault ship in the Black Sea, and submarines loaded with cruise missiles. There have been many comments on Russia's move. According to some commentators, the sudden movement of the ships from the region was interpreted as an exercise. Some commentators, on the other hand, stated that Russia, which is constantly suffering heavy losses in the war, may have withdrawn its ships and submarines from the region to save them from a possible Ukrainian attack. Another interpretation is that these ships are on their way to supply Crimea after the destruction of the Kerch Bridge by the Ukrainian army. Warships took over the task of supplying Crimea. Many warships were delivering supplies to Crimea. However, war analysts say that dozens of ships and submarines will not move at the same time for resupply. A striking allegation was also made about Russia's sudden move in the Black Sea. According to this claim, Russia may attempt to establish a land bridge with Transnistria, the breakaway state from Moldova. There is a thought that Putin may attack the Dniester River, which connects the Black Sea to Transnistria. Putin may be planning to drive the Russian Navy into the south of Ukraine, including Odessa, to the Moldovan border, by occupying this region. Putin may want to cut Ukraine's connection with Crimea and block Ukraine's access to the sea. But there is one fact that Putin still hasn't realized. The Ukrainian army can monitor every move of the Russian Navy in real time. Moreover, Western and European states are helping Ukraine in this about 2 or 3 months after the start of the war. The flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the cruiser Moscow, was bombed by Ukrainian missiles. After this successful operation, the statements of American officials came to the agenda unmanned. American officials state that they had located the Moscow cruiser. The Ukrainian army requested information from U.S. intelligence about the ships seen south of Odessa, and U.S. officials shared the location of this ship and the information that it was the Moscow cruiser with the Ukrainians. The Ukrainian military then shot down the Moscow cruiser with missiles. The U.S. has not commented on this incident, but an official said that the U.S. provided Ukraine with intelligence in the last week of 2022. The United States announced a new round of sanctions against Russia. These sanctions concern production companies with links to the Russian Navy. The U.S. government imposed sanctions on a total of 10 companies. These companies were selling navigation, optics, batteries, and many other products to the Russian Navy in many important areas, such as communication systems and automation control systems. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said of the sanctions decision, "We are determined to impose additional severe consequences on President Putin and his enablers for Russia's unconscionable war against Ukraine. In the wake of Russian naval operations against Ukrainian ports, including those that provide much-needed food and grain to the world, The United States is today imposing sanctions on Russian naval units. Putin is failing at sea just as he is failing on the ground and in the air. This failure is compounded by the sanctions imposed by Western and European countries. Although Putin is constantly changing his plans to avoid all these problems, he is unable to overcome them. Putin dismissed Admiral Igor Vladimirovich Osipov, commander of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation, due to the loss of the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, the cruiser Moscow, increased attacks on the port of Sevastopol, and the explosion at the Crimean Saki airfield. But Osipov's dismissal did not solve any problem. Putin withdrew the Russian Navy to the port of Novorossiysk due to the losses suffered in the port of Sevastopol. It became clear that this move was not a solution either. In the past few days, the ships in Novosibirsk harbor also left the region. The Russian Navy has no presence in the seas. The Ukrainian army has also proved its strength in the Navy with the domestically produced Neptune anti-ship cruise missile and many ammunition procured from Western and European countries. When the conflicts intensified in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, especially in the cities of Bakhmut and Salvador, and when we look at the activity at sea, it can be predicted that the war will last for a long time. Kirilo Budanov, the head of the main directorate of the intelligence of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, said that they were preparing for a major offensive in March. Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov also said that Russia was preparing for a new and comprehensive ground operation. There is also talk that Russia will announce a new mobilization at any moment. The war is likely to intensify in 2023. We will continue to bring you all the developments of the Russia-Ukraine war. What do you think will happen in the Black Sea in the coming days? How do you interpret the successes of the Ukrainian Navy?